I recently watched a video where Tony Robbins made a point that caught my attention. He said basically that the meaning we give something affects the emotion we feel, and that emotion influences what we do next. I agree with a lot of that statement, but I think there's another layer we need to talk about. Because when you've been living in survival mode long enough, sometimes you don't consciously choose the meaning. Your nervous system gets there first, and a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Your boss might send you a message. Can you come see me when you get a minute? That's it. No explanation. But before you've even stood up from your desk, your mind is already building the case, or possibly the worst case scenario. For example, what did I screw up? Who complained? Am I in trouble? Another example would be that you send somebody a text and they don't immediately answer. So 20 minutes later, you're not thinking, oh, they're probably just busy. You're thinking they're pissed off at me for some reason. I said something wrong, or they're pulling away from me. Another example, your kid walks into a room with an attitude, and instead of thinking maybe they just had a rough day at school, your body hears disrespect. Now your tone changes. Their tone changes. And 30 seconds into it, everybody's reacting to something that may not have even been happening 30 seconds ago. That's the part I think we miss when we tell people to simply change their mindset. Sometimes the problem isn't only the meaning you gave the moment. Sometimes the condition you were already in helped choose that meaning for you, if that makes sense. So if you've spent years braced for impact, right, or looking for problems, expecting disappointment, or as I like to call it, waiting for the other shoe to drop, or waiting for something else to go wrong in your life, survival mode can become a terrible, terrible narrator. Everything starts sounding a little bit more threatening than it actually is, a little more personal, a little more permanent. And before you know it, you're reacting to a story your nervous system wrote before you ever stopped to ask whether the story was even true or not. That's what we're talking about today. So, welcome back to the After Action Reset. I am Steve Geiger. Again, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor. I'm a Marine veteran. I'm a husband, a father, a law enforcement officer. I've spent most of my adult life around some sort of pressure in one way or another. Some of it, of course, as I've said, came with the job. Some of it came from being a provider. Some of it came from choices that I made. And some of it came from things I carried for years without really understanding what they were doing to me on a deeper level. This show is about practical recovery, not becoming soft, because I don't necessarily think that's what I'm becoming in my recovery journey, and I don't think anyone out there is necessarily soft for getting in touch with their feelings and emotions, right? And it's not about avoiding responsibility. And it's definitely not about blaming your childhood, your job, your relationships, or your nervous system for every bad decision you've ever made. Understanding the pattern, as I always say, matters. It definitely matters. But understanding the pattern doesn't excuse the behavior. We talk about accountability big time here. The goal is to recognize what survival mode is doing before it starts making every decision for you. And today, I want to talk about one of the sneakiest ways that happens. The story in your head. Because what happened and what you decided what happened meant are not always the same thing, right? What actually happened and what you thought happened in your head, they're not always the same thing. It sounds simple at face value, but when you dig a little bit deeper, it's not so simple, especially when you're overloaded or in survival mode. Think about this in the most basic way possible. Something happens. That's the event. Your brain assigns meaning to that event. That meaning in and of itself creates emotion, and that emotion starts influencing what you do next. So we have event, meaning, emotion, behavior. We tend to experience those as one thing, right? We kind of combine them all. And it's not just one thing. And we have to be able to make that distinction. Take a relationship example. Your spouse says, "You're home late." 4 words. That's the event. You arrived home late. But almost immediately, your brain may attach meaning to it. It might think, oh my God, she's pissed off at me. She thinks I don't care. Nothing I do is ever enough. Or how about this one? Here we go again, right? Even if you don't say it out loud, that might be what we're thinking. Now notice what just happened there. Your spouse gave you 4 simple words. You're home late again. Your nervous system wrote 4 freaking paragraphs from that. And you're already responding to paragraph 4 before she's even finished saying it. So instead of saying, yeah, traffic was brutal, sorry I'm late, you say, well, what do you want from me? I've been working all day. And now the other person is standing there thinking, what the hell just happened? They made an observation. You heard an accusation. She made an observation, you're home late again, and you heard accusation, right? Same sentence, completely different experiences. Now, sometimes the criticism is real. It can be. I'm not discounting that. Sometimes somebody is in fact angry. Sometimes your boss is disappointed. Sometimes your kid really is being disrespectful. It happens. Sometimes the problem is exactly what you think it is. Recovery is not convincing yourself that everybody secretly has good intentions and every hard moment is just a misunderstanding. That would be ridiculous. The goal isn't positive thinking. The goal is accurate thinking. What actually happened? What meaning did I assign to it? Are those 2 things the same? That distinction shows up everywhere. You don't get the promotion. The event is, I didn't get selected, right? The meaning might become, I'm never going anywhere in life. Or a friend doesn't call you back. The event is, no response yet. The meaning might become, I knew I couldn't count on anybody. Or you make a mistake. The event is, I screwed this up, right? I made a mistake. I messed up. The meaning might become, I always screw things up. How about you get unexpected bad news? The event may already be difficult, right? That's the event. But then your mind takes it 10 steps further. This is going to ruin everything. Or even further, this is going to ruin my life. Or I can't handle this. And once the meaning attaches itself to the event, the emotion starts responding to the meaning, not necessarily to the facts at hand. Now you're angry or defensive, ashamed, scared, controlling, withdrawn, or desperate to make the discomfort stop. Then, of course, behavior follows. Maybe you raise your voice, maybe you shut down, maybe you avoid the conversation altogether. Maybe you bury yourself in work. Maybe you reach for some sort of substance. Maybe you send the text you regret 10 minutes later. Be careful on sending out those texts when you are feeling that emotion heavy. Maybe you quit before somebody has the chance to reject you. And in the moment, all of it can feel completely justified in the moment. Because once your brain decides what something means, the emotion can start feeling like evidence. It'll actually start to back you up. For instance, I feel attacked, therefore I was attacked. Or I feel rejected, therefore I was rejected. I feel like a failure, therefore I must be failing. But emotions don't work like courtroom evidence. They're information for us, and it's important information. But information still has to be interpreted. That's why I don't love the idea of simply controlling your emotions. Anger may be telling you something, and that something is important. Fear may be telling you something important as well. Grief may be telling you something. Shame may be telling you something. That shame, that was a huge one for me, right? And for years, it was telling me something. I just didn't want to listen. But just because an emotion has information doesn't mean it's automatically command authority, right? You can hear anger without handing it the microphone. You can feel fear without letting fear write the plan for you. You can feel rejected without immediately deciding nobody wants you. A feeling can be completely real without the story attached to it being completely true. And that requires a little space between what happened and what you decided it meant. That space, as I talk about quite often, is where recovery starts. High-functioning people can struggle with this because we tend to trust our judgment. We are the ones who are solving the problems. We're making the decisions. We're managing all the pressure. So when our brain says this is what's happening, we actually believe it. Why wouldn't we? That's how we were built, right? That's how we're hardwired. But competence in and of itself doesn't make you immune to survival mode. You can be excellent at your job and still catastrophize one email. You can be disciplined and still interpret rest as laziness. I talk about that. You can be a good parent and still hear disrespect where your kid was actually overwhelmed. I have 3 kids, 3 daughters, and they're all teenagers. I oftentimes can get wrapped up in that last one really, really quick. So I have to take a step back. I have to create that space between the event and the emotion, right? You can be strong and still have your nervous system running on an outdated playbook. That's what makes this so difficult, and it's not always very easy to identify it. The response feels current in the moment. Sometimes the story is old, and that's where we're going next. Because survival mode usually doesn't invent a brand new meaning every time something happens. It reaches for the story you already know best, the one that you've been telling yourself for a long time. For example, I'm not enough. I'm on my own. I can't trust anybody. I have to stay in control. Something bad is coming. I can feel it. The event may have happened 10 seconds ago, but the meaning you attach to it may have been following you for 20 years. And if we're going to change the reaction, we have to understand why that meaning showed up so fast in the first place. And that's where this gets deeper. We start peeling back the onion. Because survival mode usually doesn't invent a brand new story every time something happened. It reaches for the story you already know best. Maybe that story is, as I said earlier, I'm not enough. That was a huge one for me for the longest time. I not only thought I wasn't enough, I believed it. I'm on my own. I can't trust anybody. I have to stay in control, or something bad is coming. Then something happens, of course, right? Because something's going to happen every single day. So let's just say something happened today, and an old story starts interpreting it before you even realize what is happening. If the story you've carried all your life, or for many years, or however long it is I'm on my own, someone not calling you back doesn't just mean they got busy. It can feel like confirmation. See, I knew I couldn't count on anybody. If your story is, I have to stay in control, uncertainty doesn't just feel inconvenient. It feels outright dangerous. You don't know how the meeting is going to go. You don't know what the test result is going to say. You don't know whether the business decision is going to work or not. And before anything has actually happened, your mind is already 10 moves ahead, preparing for the worst possible case scenario. Not because you enjoy being miserable, that's not what I'm saying. Because somewhere along the way, being prepared started feeling safer than being surprised. That's an important distinction. Because not every pattern started in childhood. Sometimes it did, to be fair. But life keeps teaching us, regardless of the circumstances. A bad supervisor can teach you something. A betrayal can teach you something. Financial instability can teach you something. A divorce can teach you something. Addiction can teach you something. Loss can teach you something. Years in a high-pressure environment can teach you many things. Repeated failure can even teach you something. Life creates patterns. That's how this works. If people have lied to you repeatedly over and over, suspicion didn't come out of nowhere, right? You learned it. If every time you asked for help you ended up disappointed, self-reliance probably started looking pretty reasonable. If you spent years in an environment where hesitation could get somebody hurt, being hyper alert may have been useful in that situation. That's why I don't like shaming the adaptation. Survival mode usually had a reason. Something in you learned. This is how we get through this. This is how it's supposed to be done. And for a while, maybe it worked. The problem isn't necessarily that the strategy existed. The problem is when the environment changes and the strategy doesn't. I know this one personally from many years of experience. I spent years in environments where anticipating problems was part of doing the job well. You looked ahead, you read people, you noticed what changed. You asked what could go wrong before it actually went wrong. That was useful at the moment, sometimes even necessary. But your nervous system doesn't automatically clock out when you do. You can leave the environment and still carry the posture of the environment that you were in. Still scanning, still anticipating, still interpreting uncertainty as something that needs to be solved immediately. And now a strength in one setting can actually become friction in another setting. That's true for a lot of things in life. Hypervigilance can help you identify a threat. It can also make a quiet room feel suspicious. Self-reliance, for example, can carry you through a crisis. It can also convince you years later that asking for help means weakness. Emotional distance can help you function through something brutal. It can also make it hard to be fully present when the danger is gone. Control can create order amongst chaos. But if control becomes the only way you feel safe, anything unpredictable starts feeling personal. That's the problem with outdated strategies. They don't announce themselves as being outdated. They usually still feel responsible, protective, necessary. So you tell yourself, I'm just being prepared, or I'm just handling it. I'm just making sure nothing falls apart. Maybe. It's worth asking though, what am I actually preparing for? Is it something real or something familiar? Because those are not always the same thing. Real or familiar. Real is in the moment. Familiar is an outdated story, an outdated playbook, right? Sometimes survival mode doesn't predict the future. It repeats the past. That's why the response feels current even when the story is old. You get corrected at work and suddenly you don't just hear, fix this. What you hear is, you should have known better. You make one financial mistake and it doesn't say that was a bad decision. It becomes, you're going to lose everything. You're exhausted and need a day off. But instead of, I need recovery, the story tells you you're getting weak or you're falling behind. Other people are working, so of course, you buckle in and you keep moving. Not because movement is always necessary, because stillness means something to you. That's the part we often miss. Events don't arrive empty. We meet them carrying history or baggage. If everyone remembers the story I told about the invisible backpack with the rock, putting a rock in it every single time something happens, right? And history influences our interpretation. Now, that doesn't mean the interpretation is always wrong. If somebody has proven repeatedly that they're untrustworthy, caution, of course, may be appropriate. If your finances really are unstable, concern makes sense. If your job is genuinely at risk, preparation may be a wise move. Recovery isn't about pretending history doesn't matter. It's refusing to let history automatically decide what every new moment means. That takes awareness. Because survival mode loves patterns. Patterns reduce uncertainty. If you already know people leave, then you don't have to sit in the discomfort of not knowing why somebody has gone quiet. You already have the answer because history has shown you. They're leaving. If the story is, I'm not enough, you don't have to wonder why you didn't get selected. You already have the answer because I wasn't good enough. If the story is, something always goes wrong, you don't have to tolerate the uncertainty when life gets quiet. You already know what comes next. Just wait. Now, that may sound pessimistic at first, but to a nervous system that has lived through enough unpredictability, pessimism can feel like preparation. If I expect the worst, maybe it won't catch me off guard. Who here has ever said, expect the worst, hope for the best? That's a version of it. If I don't trust anybody, maybe nobody can betray me. How about that one? If I never need anybody, maybe nobody can disappoint me. If I stay busy, maybe I don't have to feel what shows up when things get quiet. Those strategies can make a person look incredibly capable from the outside. Like I said, disciplined, prepared, independent, productive. But sometimes what looks like strength from the outside is actually a system trying very hard not to be surprised again. That's why we need curiosity instead of shame. Ask yourself, where did this story become useful? Not what's wrong with me. Maybe I'm on my own helped you survive a bad season of your life where you really were on your own. Maybe I have to stay in control developed because things around you were unpredictable. Maybe I'm not enough pushed you to achieve at a very high level, like it did for me. Constantly just one promotion, next promotion, next promotion, next promotion, always climbing the rung, right? I wasn't enough. Maybe distrust kept you from getting hurt again. I get it. Understand the reason, then ask the more important question. Does this story still belong everywhere? Because a strategy can be understandable and still be costing you something now. And that's where accountability matters. You can understand why you became controlling without pretending control has no impact on you. You can understand why you shut people out without pretending distance doesn't affect anyone. You can understand why you work constantly without pretending your body can run that pace forever, which it can't, I'm telling you. You can understand why you reach for relief without pretending the relief is recovery. Explanation gives you somewhere to intervene. It doesn't give you immunity from the consequences, however. That's one of the lines that I here at AAR will keep coming back to. Your survival mode may have written the first draft. You are still responsible for what you publish. And there's another distinction I want you to notice. A feeling can be completely real without the story attached to it being completely true. If you feel rejected, that feeling is real. If you feel afraid, the fear is real. If you feel ashamed, that experience is real. But I feel rejected and I have been rejected are not necessarily the same statement. I feel like I'm failing and I'm a failure are not the same statement. I feel unsafe and I'm currently in danger may not be the same thing. Now, that doesn't mean you argue with yourself necessarily in that exact moment. It means you create enough room to investigate a little bit further, dig a little bit deeper, right? What happened? What did I decide it meant? Where have I heard this story before? That's regarding looking into your past, your history. And is that story describing this moment right here, right now? Or is it borrowing this moment to prove something I already believed? That's a hard question, but it can become very useful if you use it. Because once you can see the old story, the history, the patterns, you have a better chance of stopping it from automatically becoming the next decision you make. And that matters because the story doesn't stay in your head. It creates emotion. Emotion influences our behavior. Behavior repeated becomes a pattern. And patterns repeated long enough start to look like a life. They become habits. That's where we're going next. And this is all critically important because the story doesn't stay in your head. It creates emotion, as we said earlier. And emotion influences our behavior. Behavior repeated, again, becomes patterns over time. And then those patterns become habits. It starts to look like your life. This is where the original point from Tony Robbins becomes very, very useful. Meaning affects emotion. Emotion affects what you do next. But if survival mode is influencing the meaning at the beginning of that chain, it can quietly influence everything downstream. In other words, it's polluting the water, if that makes sense. Think about getting passed over for a promotion. That's the event, right? You being passed over for promotion. Now, simply put, you didn't get selected. One meaning might be, I wasn't ready yet. Okay. It still hurts, but doable, right? I just wasn't ready yet. You can still be disappointed at that, but disappointment leaves room for curiosity, right? For example, what do I need to do to improve? What feedback can I get out of this? Do I still want this promotion? Another meaning might be, see, I'm never going anywhere. Same event, now disappointment becomes shame or resentment. Maybe altogether you just stop trying. Maybe you become bitter toward the person who did get the promotion or the person who gave the promotion. Or maybe you go to the opposite direction and start working yourself into the ground because now you have something to prove, not only to yourself, but to everyone else. The promotion didn't make all of those decisions. The meaning attached to it helps shape them. Same event, different meaning, different emotion, different person walking into tomorrow. Now, let's take something completely different. You finally get an empty Saturday. Nothing on the calendar. Nothing urgent, no emergency, no major obligations. You could actually recover during this Saturday. But survival mode looks around and says, what are we forgetting? So you check your email. Find something that needs fixing or something that could have waited maybe until Monday. Or you run another errand, something that maybe you didn't need to do. Or you start another project. And pretty soon you've turned your day off into unpaid overtime. Then you tell yourself, I'm just productive. And maybe that's the case. Maybe some of those things needed to be done. But I'm talking about to the extreme. And I'm pretty sure everyone here understands what I'm getting at. But maybe rest means something to you. Maybe rest means I'm lazy. I'm falling behind. I should be doing something. If I stop moving, I'm wasting time. Now that meaning, again, creates an emotion. That emotion could be guilt. The guilt creates movement, right? You feel guilty, so therefore you start finding things to do. And if you repeat that long enough, eventually you become somebody who doesn't know how to rest without feeling like you're doing something wrong. You can even take a vacation and somehow turn it into another performance metric. I've mentioned it before on some of my shorter form stuff. Who here has ever gone on vacation, 2, 3, 4-day, weekend-long vacation, or maybe even longer, and you come back from the vacation and you do not feel rested? That is a good example. So you're on vacation, right? You're sitting on the beach and you're thinking to yourself, I should be enjoying this more. Congratulations, now you're failing vacation. That's impressive, right? But several of us have done it. Some of us are still continuing to do it. That's what meaning can do. Even peace can become another thing to accomplish, right? Like it's a task. Now think about health uncertainty. The doctor says, we want to take another look. Whatever it is, right? The doctor wants to take another look. That's all you know. But survival mode hates empty space. So it starts writing for you, right? It just starts jotting down on the pages. What if this is serious? What if I can't work? What happens to my family? What if my entire life changes? Concern in and of itself, like of that instance, of course, it's reasonable. But there's a difference between I'm concerned because I don't know yet and mentally living inside the worst possible outcomes before you even have the information. Your body can spend 3 days responding to a catastrophe that hasn't even happened yet. So you stop sleeping. You can't focus. You start snapping at people because you're getting short and irritable. You Google symptoms at 2 a.m, which has probably never ended with somebody calmly putting the phone down and saying, well, that was reassuring, right? That doesn't mean health problems aren't real. Sometimes the news is difficult to hear. I get it. Sometimes the event is painful. It happens. That's important because I don't want this episode to become just change the meaning and everything will be okay. Absolutely not. Some things are awful in life. We can never take away the fact that life is going to send us obstacles and hurdles that we're going to have to go over and mountains we're going to have to freaking walk through, right? Pain and grief and sorrow, all those things happen in life. You lose somebody you love. It hurts. It's going to hurt. You get fired from a job. Of course, it matters. Somebody betrays you. It's real. You make a serious mistake and there are consequences. Sometimes the most accurate thing you can say is, this hurts. Or I don't know what happens next. Or I need help. Recovery isn't about forcing a positive meaning onto a painful event. I'm not saying attach a positive feeling onto a painful event. And I'm not saying not to feel. It's trying to find an accurate meaning for the event that took place. There's a big difference between I failed and I am a failure. I lost something and I lose everything. This person hurt me and nobody can be trusted ever again. Or I'm overwhelmed and I can't handle my life. One describes the thing that happened, the event. The other starts defining who you are. And once the meaning becomes identity, behavior starts organizing itself around it. It starts building all around it. If I believe I'm a failure, why risk failing again? If I believe nobody can be trusted, why ever let anyone close again? If I believe I'm on my own, why should I ask for help? If I believe my value comes from being useful, why ever stop performing? That last one is huge for high-functioning performers. If I believe my value comes from how I perform or me being useful, I'm just always going to be useful. Now, the story isn't just describing your life. It's helping build it, like I said. That's why shame and accountability create such different outcomes. You make a mistake, shame says, hide it. Defend yourself. Make an excuse. Don't let anyone know. Accountability says, I screwed that up. What do I own? What am I supposed to do about it? What needs to change? What do I need to do to fix it? What can I repair? Same mistake, different meaning, different emotion, different behavior. Shame asks, what's wrong with me? That's shame. What is wrong with me? Accountability says, what needs to change or what do I need to do? One turns the event into identity. The other turns the event into useful information for you. And information can be used. That's recovery. Not avoiding the truth, using the truth. So now the practical question becomes, if the event creates meaning, meaning creates emotion, emotion influences our behavior, and survival mode can influence the meaning before we even realize it. Well, where do we interrupt the chain? That's where today's recovery rep comes in. And I've mentioned this recovery rep before on my short form. So I'm going to call it separate the event from the story. 3 questions. That's it. 3 questions. The first one, I want you to ask yourself, what actually happened? Strip the actual story away. What actually happened? Imagine there was a camera in the room. What would the camera have picked up if it was just the camera, nothing else, right? Not my boss embarrassed me. Try my boss corrected me in front of 2 people. Not my career is falling apart. Try I didn't get the position. It's not nobody cares about me. Try I sent a message and I haven't received a response yet because people get busy. We're not minimizing what happened. We're making it specific. Specific problems can be dealt with. Survival mode loves words like always, never, everything, nothing, everybody, nobody. Accuracy usually sounds much less dramatic, sometimes annoyingly so. Question number 2. What did I decide it meant? This is where you name the story. They don't respect me. I'm failing. I'm about to lose everything. I'm being rejected. I'm weak. I'm on my own. Don't fight with the story yet. I want you to just notice it. And notice what emotions showed up because of the story. Because a feeling can be completely real without the story attached to it being completely true, as I said earlier. Then I want you to give yourself one more option. What else could be reasonably true about that event? What else could be reasonably true about that event? Not something positive, something reasonable. Maybe you did make a mistake. Maybe somebody really is disappointed. Maybe the situation really does need attention. Fine, I get it. We're taking this one at face value. Now, at least you're dealing with reality instead of 10 imaginary steps beyond it. Which brings us to question 3. What response fits what I actually know? What response fits to what I actually know? Maybe you need to act. Maybe you need to apologize. Maybe you need to ask a question. Maybe you need to make a plan. Maybe you need to set a healthy boundary. Maybe you need to ask for help. Or maybe you need to just wait and do nothing. That last one can be hard. Sometimes the correct response is, I don't know yet. The results aren't back in, so I don't know. The meeting hasn't happened yet, so I don't know. They haven't responded. I don't know. You don't need tomorrow's answer today, right now, this second. Sometimes survival mode would rather have a terrible explanation than no explanation at all, because at least then it knows what to prepare for, right? Recovery learns to tolerate uncertainty without filling every empty space with catastrophe. And sometimes the response is not doing anything at all. Sometimes grief needs to be felt. It's healthy. Sometimes disappointment needs a minute or two. Sometimes there isn't a lesson to be learned yet. There isn't a strategy. There isn't anything to fix before bedtime. Sometimes this hurts is enough. That's part of recovery too. This rep may feel slow at first. Doing these questions may feel slow at first. What happened? What did I decide it meant? What response fits to what I actually know? Right? Maybe the first few times you don't catch it until after you react. And that's fine. I still to this day will respond or react, and then I'll go back and I'll be like, oh man, all right. I could have just paused a little bit and I could have started asking the questions, right? That's awareness. And again, that awareness starts to create that space, and that space is going to give us a little bit more time to deal with these things. So next time, maybe you catch it in 10 minutes, right? And then 5 minutes, and then 2 minutes. And then maybe you can just fire it off the cuff. Something happens, and you're like, oh, okay. You start asking yourself the questions. Eventually, you might feel that emotional spike and hear yourself thinking, wait a minute, what story am I writing right now? That little interruption matters, right? It does. I want you to be aware of it. Because recovery isn't about never having an automatic reaction. It's about shortening the distance between the automatic reaction and the conscious response. And I think faith has a place here too. One of the stories survival mode has told me personally is everything depends on me. I have to anticipate everything, right? I'm hypervigilant. I have to control everything. I have to prevent everything, fix everything, carry everything. Faith has required me to surrender some of that. Not responsibility, control. And there's a difference. I'm responsible for the choices that I make. I'm responsible for the way that I treat people. I'm responsible for repairing damage that I create. I'm responsible for the next right action. But as I know, I'm not God. I don't know what tomorrow holds, and pretending I can control enough variables to guarantee that nothing bad is ever going to happen is exhausting. Sometimes faith for me is simple as I'll handle what's actually in front of me right now, and I'll trust God with what isn't, which is everything else in life, right? So let's bring this all the way back to where we started. Tony Robbins made the point that the meaning we give something influences the emotion we feel, and those emotions influence what we do next. And again, I think there is a ton of truth to that. I love it. The AAR edition, my addition to this, is pay attention to the condition you're in when you assign the meaning. Because when survival mode is holding the pen, uncertainty can read like danger. Disappointment can read like failure. Rest can read like weakness. A mistake can read like identity. And if you never question that first interpretation, meaning becomes emotion. Emotion influences behavior. Behavior becomes a pattern. And patterns repeated long enough start looking like a life. And it's a life you don't necessarily want. The event may not always be yours to control. The first thought may not be either. The first emotion might show up before you ever gave it permission. But somewhere in that sequence, recovery gives you a chance to step back in. What actually happened? What did I decide it meant? And what response fits what I actually know? That's today's recovery rep. Separate the event from the story. Give it a shot at least one time today if you can. Not on the biggest thing that has ever happened to you, right? Start on something small. Make it an email, make it a simple mistake that you may have made, maybe the unexpected bill, unanswered message, right? The moment your mind starts sprinting 10 miles ahead of reality. I want you to stop, look at the facts, name the story, then decide whether that story deserves to make the next decision. If this episode gave you language for something you've been carrying, subscribe to the After Action Reset on YouTube and follow the podcast wherever you listen. And if you know you've been living in survival mode but don't know where to start, I've created several free PDFs, but this one is the 7-day survival mode reset. You'll find it through my link in my bio or my description. It's my Beacons link. 7 days, practical recovery reps for you. It's just a practical place to begin. It's not the end all be all. Because recovery isn't learning how to control everything that happens in your life. It's learning how to become more intentional about what happens next. Recovery isn't one big breakthrough, as I say quite often. It's thousands of small recovery repetitions over time. I'll see you on the next one.